The air conditioning in the Lincoln was on full blast, but my shirt collar was still soaked with sweat. Third day on the road, third day in the company of people who reeked of money and arrogance. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Lawrence Price was dozing with his head resting on the headrest, his wrinkled face looking almost harmless in his sleep. Rose Tanner was staring at her clipboard through her thin-rimmed glasses as usual, her headphones safely shielding her from the real world. Melvin Hart was nervously rubbing his tie, looking out the window at the Arizona scenery floating by. "How much further to Phoenix, Brennan?" Hart asked, blotting his forehead with his handkerchief. "About an hour, sir, if the road is clear," I answered, turning up the volume on the air conditioner. I was driving these three for the third day in a row. Wall Street financiers, carrying some kind of securities and cash, rumored to be worth about $1.5 billion among the apex security drivers. Normally, clients of this caliber would be accompanied by an entire security team, but Price insisted on a minimal presence, just the driver. It seemed odd, but Apex didn't ask too many questions as long as the client paid. My phone vibrated. 6 hours and 28 minutes past midnight. A message from Cortez. Mission status? I mentally wrinkled my nose. Wayne Cortez, my immediate superior, never missed an opportunity to follow up, especially when it came to VIP clients. "Everything is in order. Arrival in Phoenix in 1 hour." I typed a short reply at the stoplight. We pulled onto the freeway where traffic was freer. I relaxed a little, letting myself think about what would happen when this contract ended. I desperately needed the money. My mom's medical bills were piling up on the table in my apartment, and the bank had already sent 2 potential eviction notices. This job was the only thing keeping me afloat. "Turn the music down," Price demanded irritably, waking up. "And pick up the speed. We're late." "Yes, sir." I turned the radio all the way down and pushed the gas lightly, squeezing out an extra 5 miles an hour. A sign appeared on the right side of the highway, warning of road work ahead. I noticed the lane narrowing and began to brake gently. Suddenly, a red pickup truck flying in the neighboring lane swerved its steering wheel, trying to pass in front of us before the narrowing. It was as if time had slowed down. I swerved to the left, trying to avoid the collision, but the Lincoln's right fender caught the pickup's bumper. A squeal of brakes, the thud of metal against metal, and we were spun around. I struggled with the steering wheel, trying to keep the car on the road. When we finally came to a stop, my knuckles turned white from the strain. "Is everyone okay?" I turned to the passengers. Hart looked pale but nodded. Tanner took off her headphones, a look of irritation on her face. Price slowly adjusted his crumpled jacket. "What the hell was that, Brennan?" Price hissed. "The pickup truck swerved, sir. I was trying to avoid a collision," I explained, unbuckling my seatbelt. "I have to check the damage and exchange information with the other driver." "We need to get to Phoenix today, Brennan," Price reminded me. "Not next week, not tomorrow. Today." "I understand, sir. I'll make it quick." I stepped out onto the hot asphalt. The driver of the pickup, a man in his 40s in work clothes, was already inspecting his bumper. His face was flushed with heat or anger, it was hard to tell. "What were you looking at, buddy?" He started, but when he saw my strict suit and VIP car, he slowed down a bit. "Okay, I guess the insurance will take care of it." We exchanged information and I took some pictures of the damage on both cars. The Lincoln wasn't badly damaged, a dented fender and scratches on the door. But for Apex Security and their sterling reputation, it was serious enough. Back in the car, I felt a chilling sensation. Price was looking at me as if I had just destroyed his entire fortune. "How long will it take?" he asked, enunciating each word clearly. "The car's on the move, sir. We can continue on our way right now," I answered, starting the engine. "This is unprofessional," Tanner spoke up for the first time. "You've jeopardized not only us, but the documents as well." Ma'am, I was following protocol to avoid a more serious collision, I tried to explain. Protocol doesn't involve accidents, she said, turning back to her clipboard. We continued on our way in a long silence. I could feel the sweat running down my back. It wasn't my fault, but clients at this level were rarely interested in objective facts. They wanted perfect service, period. 20 minutes later, my phone vibrated again. An email from Cortez. I was only able to check it when we stopped at a stoplight. Brennan, we have received a report from clients about your unprofessional behavior and accident while on assignment. There is no place at Apex Security for employees who jeopardize the safety of our VIP clients. You are no longer needed. Return to the office to process your termination after completing your current itinerary. Trevor Newman will replace you in Phoenix. Wayne Cortez, Chief Operating Officer, Apex Security. My stomach clenched into a tight knot. Fired. Just like that in the middle of a trip. No severance package, no chance to explain. I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. I wanted to scream, to punch the steering wheel, but instead I took a deep breath and continued driving as if nothing had happened. Melvin Hart noticed the change in my mood. "Something wrong, Brennan?" he asked with barely perceptible interest. "No, sir. Everything's fine," I lied, forcing a professional smile. By the time I arrived in Phoenix, the clock read 8:12 p.m. I parked at the entrance. I parked at the entrance to the Palmer House Hotel, the five-star establishment where Price and his colleagues were to stay. The doorman was already rushing to open the door. "We'll continue the trip at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning," Price said as he got out of the car. "I hope your replacement will be more competent." His words hit me like a slap in the face. They knew. Of course they knew. They were probably the ones who had initiated my dismissal. "Mr. Price," I couldn't help myself. The accident was not my fault. I acted in accordance with all safety protocols. Price looked at me with cold indifference. "In our world, Brennan, it's results that matter, not excuses. The results are that our trip was disrupted and our time wasted. Good day to you." They walked away without looking back, leaving me standing beside the crumpled Lincoln feeling like the ground was going out from under my feet. Half an hour later, a black SUV pulled into the hotel parking lot. Trevor Newman, a young guy who'd only been working at Apex for a couple months, got out. His smug smile spoke volumes. "Brennan, bad day?" he asked, holding out his hand for the keys. "Just do your job, Newman." I handed him the keys and the paperwork for the car. "The customers will be ready at 10 in the morning. Price likes punctuality." I know. Cortez already explained everything. Trevor patted me on the shoulder. "Don't worry, man. You'll find something else." I watched him get into the Lincoln and drive away. My office phone beeped with an incoming message. Instructions from Cortez. Corporate card deactivated. Office vehicle has been turned over to Newman. Use public transportation to return to the office. Expenses will not be reimbursed. I stood in the middle of the parking lot with my bag and personal phone 300 miles from home with virtually no money. Cortez hadn't even cared how I'd get back. I wanted to believe that the company couldn't do this, that it was a violation of the labor contract, that I could sue. But the reality was that Apex Security catered to some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the country. One call from Price and I was a nobody. I found a cheap motel a couple miles from downtown Phoenix. $49 a night was almost the last money on my card. The room was cramped and musty, with stains of unknown origin on the carpet and a whirring air conditioner that did more to spread a musty smell than cool the air. Sitting on the edge of the sold-out bed, I opened the banking app. Balance: $187.32. Not enough for next month's rent. Not enough for the next installment of my mom's medical bills. Totally not enough to live on. I scrolled through the contacts on my phone, wondering who I could call. Former co-workers? Most of them kept to themselves. The competition in our field was too high for true friendship. Old army buddies, scattered all over the country, many barely making ends meet themselves. There was a knock at the door. I tensed up. Nobody knew me here. "Who is it?" I asked as I approached the door. "Towel delivery, sir," a woman's voice answered. I opened the door. A young maid handed me a stack of faded towels. "I'm sorry to disturb you, sir. The previous shift forgot to put them in." "Thank you," I said, taking the towels. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked, probably noticing my lost look. "Yeah, I'm fine," I tried to smile. "Just a long day." When the door closed, I leaned my back against it and slowly slid to the floor. The towels fell out of my hands. For the first time all day, I allowed myself to truly realize what had happened. I'd been fired. No warning, no chance for an excuse. 7 years at Apex Security, an impeccable track record, references from dozens of VIP clients. None of that mattered because of one incident that wasn't even my fault. They thought I'd beg, that I'd crawl to Cortez on my knees, begging for a second chance, or that I'd threaten legal consequences. They were waiting for emotion, for a weakness to use against me. But I wouldn't give them that pleasure. 7 years in the military and another 7 in private security taught me one thing. When you're backed into a corner, don't show fear. Find a way out. There's always a way out. I got up off the floor, gathered my towels and put them on the bed. Then I pulled out my laptop and opened up job search websites. Perhaps it was naive, but I had to start somewhere. 2 hours later, after looking at dozens of job openings and sending at least 15 resumes, I shut down the computer. The odds were slim. Without a recommendation from Apex, it would be nearly impossible to find anything worthwhile in the security industry, and I was running out of time. I lay on the bed without undressing. The ceiling fan was spinning lazily, blowing hot air. Outside the window, Phoenix was buzzing, the city I was stuck in with no money and no prospects. They thought I'd pay, I thought, falling into a restless sleep. That I'd break down. But they don't know what I'm capable of yet. My last thought before falling asleep was, I should buy a bus ticket home, in the morning. Everything will be decided in the morning. I didn't yet know how wrong I was, or that the next 72 hours would change my life forever. The bus bounced on another pothole and I woke up, hitting my head on the glass. Outside the window, the familiar landscape of Ashfield's outskirts floated by the dreary warehouses, the faded billboards and the sparse trees desperately resisting the drought. I rubbed my neck and looked at my watch. 6 hours and 37 minutes in the morning. 3 days. Only 3 days had passed since I'd stood in the parking lot of the hotel in Phoenix, clutching the keys to the car I was supposed to hand over to Trevor. 72 hours in which my life had turned into utter chaos. The woman in the seat next to me mumbled something in her sleep. On her lap was a smartphone with a news website open. The headline in large print caught my eye. Phoenix missing. $100 million and 3 financists went away. I blinked, not believing my eyes. Carefully, trying not to wake my roommate, I leaned over to read the text under the headline. Lawrence Price, a prominent financier, and his colleagues Rose Tanner and Melvin Hart disappeared while on a business trip in Arizona. According to law enforcement, securities and cash worth about $1.5 billion disappeared with them. Police are looking into a version of kidnapping. I felt a chill go through me. Price, Tanner, and Hart are my clients. The same ones that made me lose my job disappeared. We're now arriving at Ashfield Central Bus Station. Please have your bags ready, the driver announced over the speakerphone. I grabbed my tattered bag and hurried to the exit as soon as the bus stopped. I needed to find out more. In the waiting room of the bus station, a television was on. A few people were crowded in front of the screen, which was showing a breaking news program. I squeezed closer. The body of a security agency driver was found in a motel on the outskirts of Phoenix, Police have confirmed that the deceased is Trevor Newman, an employee of Apex Security who was escorting the missing businessmen. According to preliminary reports, the cause of death was a gunshot wound. Newman is dead. Trevor, who replaced me, who took the keys to the Lincoln with that smug smile, dead. My knees buckled and I sank heavily onto the nearest bench. If I hadn't been fired, that could have been my body in that motel. The phone in my pocket vibrated. An unfamiliar number. "Brennan," I answered. "Mark Brennan?" A woman's voice, sharp and businesslike. "Detective Abigail Donovan, Kidnap Investigations. I need to talk to you." Now. An hour later, I was sitting in Ashfield Police Station in a small, stuffy interview room. Across from me sat Detective Donovan, a thin woman in her 40s with a sharp gaze and short-cropped graying hair. "Tell me again about your last meeting with Price, Tanner, and Hart," she asked, tapping her pen on her notebook. "I've already repeated my story twice, about driving them from Los Angeles to Phoenix, about the traffic incident that wasn't my fault, about how I got fired in the middle of the trip and replaced by Trevor." "They didn't say anything about their plans after Phoenix? No hint of where they were headed?" "Only that they planned to continue the trip in the morning," I replied. "They were to go to Santa Fe, then to Denver, and from there back to New York, a standard itinerary for VIPs who prefer ground transportation." "Why'd they choose a car over an airplane in the first place? $1.5 billion in a wallet isn't something one usually travels around the country with." I shrugged. "Some clients don't trust air transportation for valuable cargo. Too many prying eyes, too much scrutiny, or maybe it's something else. I'm just a driver. Was a driver. I wasn't told the details." Donovan sighed and closed the notebook. "Look, Brennan, according to my records, you were the last person to see these men before they went missing. Except for Newman, who's now dead. Do you realize what this looks like?" I'm tense. "You think I had something to do with this? I wasn't even in town when they disappeared. I didn't have access to their securities luggage, and I have no motive." "You can always find a motive. Revenge for getting fired, for example." She watched my reaction carefully. "If I wanted revenge, I'd sue Apex for wrongful termination," I countered. "But I wouldn't have kidnapped people, and I certainly wouldn't have killed Trevor. We didn't have a conflict. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so was I." The detective was silent, studying me with her gaze, as if she were trying to read my mind. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, Brennan, we have no reason to detain you at this time, but don't leave town. We're going to need you." She handed me a business card. "If you think of anything important, call me, anytime." As I left the station, I took a deep breath of fresh air. The sun was setting, painting the streets of Ashfield a golden color. I felt devastated. 3 days ago, I was a professional driver with an impeccable reputation, and today I was an unemployed suspect in a kidnapping case. Reaching my apartment in a shabby high-rise on the eastern edge of the city, I froze in front of the door. An eviction notice hung on it. "Last warning before forced eviction. Payment due in 48 hours." I tore the paper off, crumpled it up, and tossed it into the trash can in the hallway. Another problem to add to the piggy bank of trouble. The apartment greeted me with musty air and silence. I threw my bag on the floor and made my way to the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator. Empty, except for a couple cans of beer and dried cheese. I took the beer and went into the living room where my mom's medical bills were piled on the table. Looking over the last of them, I felt everything inside clench. $5,783 for last month's rehab. Without Apex insurance, I couldn't pay even half that amount. The phone vibrated again. St. Elizabeth's Medical Center. "Mr. Brennan?" The receptionist's voice sounded stern. "We haven't received payment for your mother's treatment. If the funds are not received by the end of the week, we will be forced to stop the procedures." "I'll pay," I answered, clutching the phone until my fingers ached. "I just need some time." Time is something your mother doesn't have much of, Mr. Brennan. Her condition requires constant care. Ending the conversation, I tossed the phone onto the couch and covered my face with my hands. The situation seemed hopeless. No job, no money, debts growing like a snowball, and a mom whose condition was getting worse by the day. And then it hit me. $1.5 billion, 3 people missing, Newman's dead. What if the key to solving this case is my chance? If I could find the missing men, if I could help recover the money, maybe that would not only clear my name but also give me a chance at a reward. I stood up and walked over to the wall where a map of the western states hung. Phoenix, then Santa Fe, Denver, New York. The route Price, Tanner, and Hart were supposed to take. Something happened along the way. Something that led to their disappearance and Trevor's death. I took a marker and circled Phoenix. That's where it all started. That's where the answer should be. But how do you start an investigation without resources? I didn't have access to surveillance cameras, phone records, bank transactions. All I had was knowledge of Apex Security's itinerary and procedures. I opened my laptop and logged into my old work account. To my surprise, it was still working. Apparently, Cortez had forgotten to deactivate my access to the internal system in a hurry. It was a breach in their security, but a chance for me. I started looking at the routing data. According to the system, Trevor had left the Palmer House Hotel at 10 hours and 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes later than scheduled. The GPS system in the car tracked his movement to the northern edge of Phoenix, where the signal suddenly disappeared. The last point on the map was a neighborhood in an old industrial area. Why had they gone there and not in the direction of Santa Fe? That was the first question worth answering. I opened Trevor's personnel file. 27 years old, single, worked for a private security firm in Seattle before Apex. Nothing noteworthy, but something in his bio made me suspicious. Newman worked for Silver Shield Security, a small company I'd once heard nasty rumors about, something to do with industrial espionage and bribing employees of rival firms. I opened a new tab and started searching for information on Silver Shield. The company was shut down 2 years ago after a scandal involving the leak of confidential customer data. Its founder, Raymond Shelton, had been convicted of fraud and money laundering. Trevor worked there until it closed. It could have been a mere coincidence, but my experience told me that in our business there are no coincidences. I went back to the client files. Lawrence Price wasn't just a financier. He was the head of Meridian Capital, an investment fund specializing in high-risk investments. In recent months, his fund had performed remarkably well despite the general market downturn. This has raised suspicions among financial analysts, but no formal charges have been made. Rose Tanner is the CTO and was responsible for digital security and transactions. Her background included working for several major banks and financial institutions. Melvin Hart is a lawyer specializing in international financial law. Together, they made the perfect team for, what? Legitimate investments or something darker? I closed my laptop and walked over to the window. It was already getting dark outside and lights were on in the windows of the neighboring houses. People were coming home from work, cooking dinner, watching TV, living ordinary lives, a life that seemed unattainable to me now. My gaze fell on Detective Donovan's business card on the table. I could tell her about my suspicions, about the strange itinerary, about Trevor's past. But what if she saw it as an attempt to deflect suspicion from me? Or worse, what if the police had someone connected to the disappearance? No, I needed proof first. Something concrete that I could produce. I opened the laptop again and logged into the Apex navigation system. The company's company cars were equipped not only with standard GPS trackers, but also with hidden beacons in case they were stolen or attacked. This information was only available to security personnel, but I had taken an electronic intelligence course in the Army and knew a few tricks. After 20 minutes of hacking into the system, I accessed the data from the backup beacon in Lincoln that Trevor was running. The last signal had been sent 48 hours ago from an area 100 miles north of Phoenix, a backwater with only forests and a few abandoned mining camps. I opened the map and found this point. The nearest settlement was Pine Ridge, a tiny town lost among the mountains. What were Trevor and the clients doing there, away from the official route? I started looking for information about Pine Ridge, a town of less than 1,000 people, a former silver mining center, now virtually abandoned. But one detail caught my attention. Among the few attractions there was a hunting lodge, once owned by a local tycoon and now rented out to tourists. I looked for photos of the lodge, a massive log structure perched on a mountainside overlooking the valley, the perfect place to hide someone or something. Secluded, inaccessible, with minimal risk of being discovered. It was a lead, a thin thread, but the only one I could grab onto. I started packing: map, flashlight, spare batteries, knife, binoculars, first aid kit, anything that might come in handy. I put the rest of the cash, a total of $123, in a hidden pocket of my jacket. Then I pulled a metal box from under the bed. Inside was a Glock 19, my personal weapon from my time in the Army. I hadn't touched it in years, but now I felt it might be needed. I checked the gun, made sure it was in working order, and tucked it into my shoulder holster. If I'm right, and Trevor and his clients are really out there in the mountains, the people who organized their kidnapping won't be happy about an intruder. The last thing I did before I left was write a short note and put it in an envelope along with Detective Donovan's business card. I addressed the envelope to my neighbor, an elderly retired teacher who often picked up my mail when I was away. "If I'm not back in a week, give this to Detective Donovan," I wrote on the back of the envelope and dropped it in my neighbor's mailbox. Getting into my old Ford, I took one last look at the house. The bills, the eviction threats, the uncertainty, all of it was waiting for my return. If I came back. As I started the engine, I caught myself in a strange thought. For the first time in a long time, I felt something resembling hope, a crazy endeavor bordering on suicide, but it was a chance not only to find answers, but perhaps to change my fate. I pulled onto the highway heading north. It was about a 6-hour drive to Pine Ridge. 6 hours to think and prepare for what might be waiting for me at the end of the road. Somewhere out there in the mountains lurked the mystery of the disappearance of 3 financiers and $1.5 billion, and I was determined to solve it no matter what it took. The road to Pine Ridge wound through the mountains like a worn snakeskin. My old Ford rumbled up the hills, and the air conditioner had long since given up fighting the August heat. I rolled down the window, letting in the hot air that smelled of pine needles and dust. It was dusk when I pulled over to the side of the road, a mile from the last known GPS signal from Trevor's car. Pulling a tattered map out of the glove compartment, I checked the notes I'd made before I left. So, what did I have? Trevor and the clients had left the Palmer House Hotel at 10:15 in the morning, 15 minutes later than scheduled. The official route should have taken them to Santa Fe. Instead, the Lincoln headed north until the signal was lost in the vicinity of Pine Ridge. I unfolded a printout of the GPS tracker data. The last entry, 12 hours and 32 minutes. The car stopped on the side of Highway 287, about 2 miles from the Pine Ridge turnoff. After that, silence. Either the tracker had malfunctioned or had been deliberately disabled. But there was still a backup beacon whose data I had hacked into. Its last signal came the next day at 6 hours and 22 minutes in the morning from the vicinity of the old hunting lodge. I folded up the map and pulled back onto the road. Pine Ridge was about a half-hour drive away. The town greeted me with extinguished storefronts and empty streets. The only sign of life was the light in the windows of a small diner on the main street. I parked and went inside. An elderly waitress was dozing behind the counter, The jingle of a bell above the door made her wince. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said, taking a high chair at the counter. "Coffee, please. And some information, if I may." She gave me a suspicious look, but poured coffee into a cracked mug. "What kind of information are you looking for in Pine Ridge, young man? There's not much going on here. I'm looking for a black Lincoln Continental that may have passed through here 2 or 3 days ago, with 3 passengers and a driver." The waitress hesitated, wiping the counter with a tattered rag. Such a car had indeed passed through town, an unusual sight for our area. They stopped here for gas and a bite to eat. "Do you remember which direction they went?" "Toward the old mines on their way to Pratt's hunting grounds." Odd choice for men in expensive suits like that. I took a sip of coffee, which was surprisingly good. "What's the hunting grounds?" "It used to be the lands of Old Man Pratt, the silver magnate. After he died, the town took it over, but it's rarely visited by tourists. It's too far from civilization. There's a couple of hunting cabins for rent, but mostly abandoned." "Do you know of anyone who might have rented a cabin in the last few days?" The waitress shrugged her shoulders. "Contact Harry at the motel across the street. He handles rentals on behalf of the city council." Thanking her, I paid and headed toward the motel, a shabby, one-story building with a flashing neon sign that read Pine Ridge Inn. At the front desk sat a gaunt man in his 50s with deep bald spots and a wary look. "Room?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the crossword puzzle. "Maybe later. I was told you were in the business of renting hunting lodges." He put the pen aside and looked at me carefully. "Are you with the IRS?" "No, I'm looking for some friends. They were supposed to rent a cabin a few days ago. Black Lincoln, 3 passengers, driver." "Oh, those city people," he scratched his chin. "Yeah, they rented the east cabin, paid cash a week in advance." I leaned carelessly on the counter. "How long have they been there?" "3rd day, I think. It's an odd bunch. Usually it's hunters or hikers, nature lovers. But these—" He shook his head. "They don't look like either of them." "You didn't give them keys to the house?" "To the east cabin? The lock's been broken for years. I just showed them the way on the map and took the money." I took out a $20 bill. "I need that map too." He took the money and pulled out from under the counter a tattered tourist map with hunting trails marked. A circle circled one of the lodges on the eastern slope of the mountain. "It's too late to go there now," he warned. "The road is bad and you can get lost in the dark." "I'll take a room," I decided. "I'll leave in the morning." He handed me a key with a wooden fob. "Number 7, at the very end. Breakfast from 7 to 9. The room was small and Spartan. A bed, a bedside table, an overstuffed chair, and a tiny bathroom with a shower that leaked rusty water. But I didn't care about the amenities. I spread a map on the bed and began to plan tomorrow's route. The ringing of the phone interrupted my thoughts. The number was unidentifiable. "Brennan," I answered warily. "Mark, it's Ray Fleming," came the husky voice of my former colleague from Apex. "I hear you're interested in the company. And Trevor." I tensed. Ray was one of the few people at Apex I could call a friend, if not a friend, at least a buddy. But how did he know I was looking for information? "How did he know that, Ray?" "It doesn't matter. What's important is that you need to be careful. You're digging where there are too many secrets buried." "I just want to understand what happened. I got fired because of an incident with these clients and now they're missing and Trevor's dead." Ray was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "I'll meet you. Not over the phone. In an hour at the Desert Creek Motel on mile 62nd of the highway, room 12. He hung up before I could ask him anything. The Desert Creek was an even more shabby place than the Pine Ridge Motel. Peeling paint, a broken parking lot, a neon sign with burned-out letters. I pulled up next to the only other car, Ray's shabby Chevy. The door of number 12 was ajar as I approached. Ray looked drained and nervous. His always neat uniform was wrinkled and his cheeks showed 3 days of stubble. "Come in quickly." He pulled me inside and locked the door with a chain. "What's going on, Ray? Why the secrecy?" "Because something bad is going on at Apex, Mark, and I think you just happen to be at the center of it." He pulled a crumpled pack of cigarettes out of his pocket and lit up, breaking every motel rule. "After you got fired, Cortez was unnaturally agitated. Usually he doesn't care about the drivers, but here he was personally calling Trevor, giving some special instructions. And when the news came in about the missing customers, he didn't seem surprised. More like, concerned." "You think Cortez had something to do with the disappearance?" Ray blew a stream of smoke toward the ceiling. "I don't know, but they knew each other long before Price became an Apex client. That was important information. Cortez never mentioned a personal acquaintance with a VIP client." "I also grabbed something." Ray held out a crumpled envelope to me. "Trevor's personal effects. The police seized his locker, but he left this jacket in the break room just before the trip. I thought you might need it." The envelope contained Trevor's tattered leather jacket. I started searching the pockets. A bunch of keys, a crumpled pack of gum, a few checks. One of them caught my eye. A check from the Last Frontier gas station, a small station on the outskirts of Pine Ridge, according to the address. The date coincided with the day I was fired. In addition to gasoline, Trevor bought 6 more bottles of water, energy bars, and a first aid kit. "Why would he need so much water and food for a short trip?" I said thoughtfully. "And the first aid kit? Sounds like he was preparing for an extended stay somewhere without access to stores. Or preparing for something dangerous," Ray added. I continued to look through the jacket and found a small notebook in the inside pocket. It was filled with coordinates, time, and some initials. The last entry read, "VD 6 a.m. transmission." "VD, East Lodge," I muttered. 6 a.m. was the time of the last signal from the backup beacon in Lincoln. "What lighthouse?" Ray frowned. I told him about my investigation, about the GPS data and what I'd learned at Pine Ridge. "Do you think Trevor was involved in the kidnapping?" Ray asked. "Maybe. Or he was used. But the fact is, he brought the clients to a secluded hunting lodge instead of following the official route. And now he's dead, and they're missing." Ray put out his cigarette on the windowsill. "I heard Cortez talking on the phone this morning. He was talking to someone about a problem that needs to be solved. Said, the goods are safe, but there's an information leak. That could mean anything." "But in the context of what's going on, it sounds suspicious," I finished for him. "Be careful, Mark. If Cortez is really involved, he'll stop at nothing to keep his secrets." "Thanks for the warning, Ray. And Trevor's jacket. By the time I got back to the Pine Ridge Motel, it was well past midnight, but sleep wouldn't come. I laid out all the evidence on the bed, the map with the marked East Cabin, the gas station receipt, Trevor's notebook, the photo of the GPS coordinates. The picture was slowly taking shape, but there were still too many gaps. I decided to act immediately. There was no point in waiting until morning. If there really were hostages being held in the cabin, every hour could be critical. Gathering everything I needed, I quietly left the motel and got into my car. The road to the East Lodge was marked on the map, but I decided not to take any chances and left the ford a mile away to get there on foot. The night was moonless, which played to my advantage. Turning on the navigator on my phone, I started up the winding dirt road. After half an hour, I stopped, hid the car behind thick bushes, and continued on foot. The forest around me was filled with night sounds, the hooting of owls, the rustling of small animals, the creaking of trees. I moved slowly, trying not to make any noise and scrutinizing the terrain. My military training had not gone to waste. I still remembered how to move stealthily. After about 40 minutes, I noticed a dim light between the trees. A hunting lodge. I pulled out my binoculars and surveyed the area. The massive log structure stood in a small clearing. A black SUV was parked nearby, but Lincoln was nowhere to be seen. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, keeping in the shade of the trees. No sign of guards outside. Strange for a supposed hostage site. Either the kidnappers were extremely overconfident or there's something wrong inside. As I approached the back of the house, I noticed a basement window ajar. This was my chance. Carefully, trying not to make any noise, I made my way down to the window and peered inside. It was dark. I shined the flashlight, covering the beam with my hand. Dusty crates, old hunting gear, a couple broken chairs. Nothing suspicious. Widening the opening, I squeezed inside and found myself in a musty basement. It smelled damp and musty. I moved slowly toward the stairs leading upstairs. Each step threatened to creak, and I chose carefully where I stepped. Once at the door, I listened. Silence. Slowly turning the knob, I opened the door and peered out into the first-floor hallway. A dim light was streaming in from a room at the end of the hallway. I pulled out my gun and took the safety off. If there really are kidnappers in there, I should be prepared for any turn of events. Moving along the wall, I approached the lighted room. Not a sound came from the door. Strange. I took another look around. The house seemed empty. But then why was the light on? Gathering my courage, I swung the door open sharply, gun at the ready. The room was empty. Only the kerosene lamp on the table illuminated the space with a flickering light. Beside the lamp lay a map pressed against an empty whiskey bottle. On the map was marked the route from Phoenix to my hometown of Ashfield. A chill ran down my spine. They knew where I lived. Were they planning on getting to me? I started looking around the room. There were cigarette butts, empty bottles, and fast food wrappers on the floor. Someone had spent a few days here, but the house was definitely empty now. I checked the rest of the first-floor rooms. No one. The second floor consisted of 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. In one of the bedrooms, I found scattered clothing similar to what Tanner and Hart had been wearing the last time we'd met, so they really were here. Back in the main room, I studied the map once more. Besides the route to Ashfield, there was another point marked on it, somewhere deep in the woods, about 3 miles from the cabin. Next to the marker was written, "Meeting place, Friday, 2 o'clock." Today was Friday. It was less than 3 hours to 2. I continued to search the house. In the kitchen cabinet, I found a broken cell phone similar to the one Price had. In the trash can, crumpled sheets of paper with some calculations and numbers on them. I smoothed one of them out. It was a scheme to move money through offshore accounts. Amounts with 6 zeros were being moved between companies with exotic names. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a motor. Someone was driving up to the house. I quickly extinguished the lamp and hid behind the heavy leather chair, holding my gun at the ready. Headlights illuminated the windows, then the motor stalled. The car door slammed and footsteps were heard on the porch. The front door creaked open. 2 men entered the house. Their faces were obscured by shadows, but I could see from their silhouettes that one was large and broad-shouldered, the other thin and short. "Check upstairs," said a low, husky voice. "Make sure they didn't leave anything behind. And you? I'll look in here. We need to find the documents. Without them, the whole operation is jeopardized." The large man started up the stairs while the other headed straight for the room where I was hiding. I gripped my gun tighter, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The man entered the room and turned on a flashlight. The beam of light slid across the walls, the furniture, the floor. I held my breath. Another second and the flashlight would illuminate my hiding place. "Hey, Decker!" shouted the one upstairs. "Someone was here a while ago. The bed's still warm." The man with the flashlight turned sharply toward the door. "Check the whole house. They could have left bugs or cameras." This was my chance. While he was distracted, I could try to slip out the window. But as soon as I moved, the floorboards creaked treacherously under my foot. The man instantly pointed a flashlight and a gun, I didn't notice when he drew it, in my direction. "Get out!" Slowly, hands where I can see them. I assessed the situation. 2 against 1, both armed. The odds were not in my favor, but I couldn't afford to get caught. Not now that I was so close to figuring it out. Instead of getting out, I rolled to the side, simultaneously shooting the lamp on the table. The glass shattered. The kerosene spilled and burst into flames. The sudden flash blinded the man, and he recoiled, covering his eyes. I rushed to the window, smashed it with my elbow, and tumbled out, landing painfully on a bush. Shots rang out behind me, bullets whizzing overhead. Without wasting time, I jumped to my feet and ran into the woods. Behind me, I heard shouting and stomping. They were following me. I ducked between the trees, ducking and changing direction, trying to throw them off my trail. The forest was my ally, dark, dense, full of hiding places. After a few minutes, the sounds of the chase grew quieter. I lurked behind a fallen tree, catching my breath. My mind was reeling with scraps of information. The map with the route to Ashfield, the meeting place in the woods, the money transfer scheme, Cortez knowing Price long before he became an Apex client. I didn't know who the people in the house were, but they were looking for documents related to some kind of operation. And they didn't look like cops or federal agents. They looked more like, mercenaries. Sitting here was dangerous. They were going to find me sooner or later. I had to get back to my car and get out of Pine Ridge. But first, I glanced at my watch. It was 15 to 1 o'clock in the morning. The mysterious meeting was just over an hour away. What if Price, Tanner, and Hart were there, or information about them? The solution came instantly. I should check out this meeting place. It was a risk, but it might be my only chance to figure out what was going on. Taking out my phone, I checked my saved coordinates and began to move cautiously in the direction indicated, staying away from the hunting lodge and the people who were now undoubtedly looking for me. The most dangerous part of my investigation lay ahead, and I had no idea how it would end. The forest gradually thinned and another hunting lodge appeared between the trees. This one looked older and more abandoned than the first, with a drooping roof, boarded-up windows, and a porch overgrown with moss. By all accounts, no one had lived here for a long time. Perfect place for a secret rendezvous, or a place to hide hostages. I checked the coordinates on my phone. It was the exact spot marked on the map in the first cabin. The clock showed 1 hour and 20 minutes of night. There were still about 40 minutes before the mysterious meeting. If the 2 men from the first cabin were headed this way, I had a little time to look around. Ducking down, I walked the perimeter of the house. No cars nearby, no sign of recent human presence outside. All the first-floor windows were boarded up tightly, but one of the boards on the basement window had come loose, creating a narrow gap. I knelt down and shined my flashlight inside. The darkness was impenetrable, the beam revealing only the outline of some crates and old furniture. No movement. Carefully, I pushed the board aside and squeezed through the narrow opening. Jumping to the cellar floor, I listened. It was silent. Only the dripping of water somewhere in the corner and the creaking of the floorboards upstairs from the gusts of wind. I began to search the cellar methodically, trying to make as little noise as possible. Old hunting trophies covered in a layer of dust, broken chairs, crates of empty bottles, nothing of interest, until my beam caught something out of place. In the far corner of the basement was a metal door, new, with a modern lock. It looked alien to the dilapidated surroundings of the hunting lodge. I walked closer and found that the door was locked from the outside with a heavy padlock. Someone really didn't want whatever was behind that door to get out. Or someone. Pulling out my gun, I cocked the butt of the gun, hitting the lock. 1, 1, 2, 3. On the 4th blow, the shackle bent, and on the 6th, it broke. I removed the lock and pulled the door gently towards me. First I smelled the odor, the heavy, stale air with a hint of unwashed bodies and blood. Then I saw three figures sitting on the floor, tied to heating pipes: Price, Tanner, and Hart. Alive, but in terrible condition. Their expensive suits turned to filthy rags, faces covered in bruises and blood, hands tied behind their backs with plastic police handcuffs, mouths taped shut. I took a quick look around. There was no one else in the room, and approached the captives. They looked at me with eyes widened with fear. I put my finger to my lips, calling for silence, and carefully removed the duct tape from Price's mouth. "Brennan?" he wheezed, unable to believe his eyes. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Getting you out of here," I replied, pulling the duct tape off Tanner and Hart. "What happened? Who kidnapped you?" "Trevor," Tanner said. Her voice was weak, like she was short of breath. "He was in on it. He brought us here instead of Santa Fe. Masked men stopped us on the way, staged an attack, and then—" "They're asking for account access codes," Hart interrupted. Unlike his co-workers, he was holding up better than anyone else. "We were moving documents for offshore accounts and digital keys to access them. It's part of a legal operation to move Meridian Capital's assets, but they think we can just wire them the money." I pulled out a knife and started cutting the plastic ties on their wrists. "Can you?" "Theoretically, yes," Price admitted. He wrinkled his nose in pain as the blood began to rush to his numb hands. "But the funds are protected by a multi-layered security system. They need physical keys that were left in the luggage and confirmation codes that are generated remotely. We tried to explain to them that we can't just transfer $1.5 billion, but—" he pointed to his bruised face. "They didn't believe it." "Who are they?" I asked, helping Tanner to her feet. She staggered and leaned against the wall. "Professionals," she answered. "Military or ex-special forces, judging by their posture and methods. 4 of them. Speak little, always wearing masks. Trevor was the only one we saw without a mask." "Where is Trevor now?" "Dead," Hart said quietly. "They shot him yesterday, right in front of us. Seems they had a disagreement over how to split the money. Trevor wanted more. I helped Price up. He groaned like his ribs were hurt. 'We need to get out of here,' I said. 'Those men will be back soon. We've got half an hour tops.' 'We can't go far.' Tanner shook her head. 'We haven't been fed in 2 days and Lawrence is badly hurt.' I looked around the room for something that might help. In the corner, I spotted a plastic water bottle and energy bars, apparently food for the captives that the kidnappers hadn't had time to give them. 'Have a drink and something to eat,' I said, handing them the water and food. 'We have a hard night ahead of us.' While they greedily drank and ate, I looked around the room further. In another corner, I found their luggage 3 travel bags tossed carelessly against the wall. I opened them. Clothes, toiletries, chargers, and a shabby metal case. 'Is this it?' I asked, showing the case to Price. He nodded. 'There's paperwork and physical access keys in there, but without the codes, which only Meridian Capital's main office can generate, they're useless.' I put the case back in my bag and slung it over my shoulder. 'We take everything. We can't leave any traces here, especially not what they're after.' 'But how do we get out?' Hart asked. 'They must have left guards outside.' 'We'll go out through the basement,' I answered, helping Price put on the jacket I'd found in one of the bags. 'There's a window through which I got in. It's wide enough.' We started moving toward the exit of the room. I led the way with my gun at the ready, followed by Hart, supporting Tanner, and followed by Price, who could barely move his legs. As I passed through the main room of the basement, I suddenly heard a sound outside. The squeak of brakes, the slamming of car doors, voices. 'They're back,' I whispered. 'Sooner than I expected. Quick, to the window.' We quickened our steps, but Price stumbled and fell, letting out a loud groan. 'Quiet!' I hissed, but it was too late. Footsteps came from upstairs. Someone was coming down into the basement. "Hide behind those crates," I whispered to Hart and Tanner. "I'll take them." They ducked into the designated hiding place, dragging Price with them. I stood outside the door leading to the basement, gun at the ready. The door swung open, and the flashlight beam slid across the room. Two men entered, both wearing tactical clothing and balaclavas. One held a flashlight, the other an assault rifle. "Check the prisoners," the one with the machine gun said. Decker said he heard a noise. The man with the flashlight headed toward the metal door I'd left ajar. As he passed me, I jumped out of hiding and hit him in the back of the head with the butt of my gun. He collapsed without a sound. The other one instantly turned around, raising his automatic, but I was faster. I fired twice, aiming for the center of mass. He flew backward, crashing into the wall and slowly slid to the floor. "Clear," I said, taking the machine gun from my downed foe. "But there are at least two more upstairs." And they must have heard the shots. As if on cue, a voice came from upstairs. "Randall? Cooper? What's going on up there?" I signaled Hart and Tanner to stay where they were and took up a position by the stairs leading to the basement. A few seconds later, feet in tactical boots appeared on it. I waited until the man was halfway down the stairs and opened fire. He managed to fire back before he fell. The bullet whizzed an inch from my head and embedded itself in the wall behind me. "Decker, they're gone!" he shouted, falling. "Call for backup!" There was a stomping sound upstairs. The last of the kidnappers was running away. I rushed to the ladder, jumping over the body, and looked up. The front door of the cabin was wide open. "Let's go now," I shouted, turning back to the hiding customers. "He's calling for backup. We don't have much time." Hart helped Tanner up, but Price could barely stand. "Ah, I won't be able to walk fast," he wheezed. "Leave me alone. Save the documents." "No one's staying," I cut him off, getting down on one knee in front of him. "Get on my back." Hart helped Price onto my back. The old man was heavier than he looked, but the years of training in the army had not gone to waste. I could still carry a grown man for miles without stopping. "To the window," I commanded, handing the machine gun to Hart. "Do you know how to use that?" He nodded. "I was in the army. Infantry. 2 tours. Good. You guys cover our retreat. Tanner's in the middle. We got to the window." Hart helped Tanner out, then climbed out himself. I handed him Price, then struggled to squeeze through the narrow opening, clinging to the ledges in the wall. It was dark and quiet outside. Too quiet. "Quick, into the woods," I whispered, hoisting Price onto my back again. "Stay close together and keep quiet." We moved toward the woods, trying to stay in the shade of the trees. Hart led the way with his machine gun at the ready, followed by Tanner, and I trailed the group with Price on my back. We had gone about 100 yards when a shot rang out behind us. The bullet slammed into a tree next to Tanner's head. "Get down!" I shouted, dropping Price into the tall grass and pulling out my gun. Hart instantly turned around and fired toward the house. Tanner fell to the ground, covering her head with her hands. I saw flashes of gunfire from the second-story window of the cabin. The kidnapper I'd missed was trying to hold us off until reinforcements arrived. "Hart, cover!" I shouted, rolling over to the nearest tree. "I'll go around to the right." He nodded and continued firing short, accurate bursts, forcing the gunner in the house to duck. Ducking down, I began to circle the house in a wide arc, using the trees as cover. I needed to neutralize the shooter before reinforcements arrived. Once in a position that gave me a good view of the second-story window, I took aim and fired 3 shots. The glass shattered, and I saw the man inside recoil. There was silence for a moment, and then the crackle of flames came from the first floor of the cabin. The one they called Decker had decided to destroy the evidence. The cabin began to fill quickly with smoke. "Let's go!" I shouted, turning back to the group. "He set the house on fire. It's going to be full of smoke soon." I picked Price up again, throwing him on my back, and we ran into the woods. Behind us, we could hear the crackle of burning wood and occasional gunshots. Decker was still trying to get us, but the fire and smoke were preventing him from aiming. We ran for about 10 minutes until I felt Price go limp on my back. I stopped and gently lowered him to the ground. "What's wrong with him?" Tanner asked, kneeling down next to her boss. "Unconscious," I answered, checking Price's pulse. "His pulse is weak, but stable. He needs medical attention." "How far to the nearest town?" Hart asked, looking around. "It's about 5 miles to Pine Ridge," I answered, "but there's no decent hospital there. The nearest one is in Flagstaff, another 50 miles south." "We need to call for help," Tanner insisted. "Do you have a cell phone?" I pulled out my smartphone. "There's no cell service. We're in a dead zone." "What about your car? Where is it?" "A mile from here," I pointed in the right direction. "But they'll probably be looking for us. The first thing they'll do is check all the roads." "We don't have a choice," Hart said. "Price won't survive without medical attention. And these documents," he patted his briefcase bag, "are worth $1.5 billion. We have to take the risk." I nodded. "Okay. But first we need to break away from the pursuit. They've probably called for backup, and a whole team of thugs will be here soon." I looked around. We were in a dense forest with no obvious landmarks, but there was a steep mountainside in the distance. "We'll go that way," I pointed to the mountain. "If we go higher, we can catch a signal and call for help. Besides, we'll be able to see if anyone's approaching." "What about Price?" Tanner asked. "He won't be able to walk." "I'll carry him," I replied, lifting Price into my arms. "Hart, you go ahead with the gun. Tanner, you stay close to me." We moved toward the mountain. Price was heavy, and every step was hard. But I couldn't afford to give up. Not now. Not when these people's lives depended on me. After an hour of climbing, we reached a small plateau on the side of the mountain. From here, we had a view of the valley and the 2 hunting lodges. The first stood dark and silent, while the second was blazing, lighting up the neighborhood with an orange glow. "Look!" Tanner exclaimed, pointing down. "Cars!" I squinted. 3 unmarked black SUVs were pulling up to the burning cabin. Men in tactical gear were jumping out of them. "Reinforcements have arrived," Hart said grimly. "They'll be combing the woods now." "Then we need to move faster," I said, picking Price up again. My muscles were burning from the exertion, but I couldn't afford to rest. "There's an old ranger's cabin on the other side of the mountain. If we get to it, we can rest and decide what to do next." "How do you know about the cabin?" Hart wondered. "I studied the map before I came here," I answered. "Old habit. Always know the way out." We continued our ascent. The night was moonless, and only the stars lit our way. Several times Price regained consciousness, mumbled something incoherent, and passed out again. His condition was worsening. "We won't make it to the hospital in time," Tanner said quietly when we stopped to catch our breath. "He's too weak." "We will," I said stubbornly. "I didn't drag you out of that basement to lose you now." Hart, who was walking ahead, suddenly stopped and raised his hand, calling for silence. "What is it?" I whispered. "Do you hear that?" He pointed ahead. "Dogs." I listened. There was indeed a distant barking from somewhere below. Hunting dogs. They'd set the dogs on our trail. "Shit," I cursed. "They're serious." "What do we do?" Tanner asked, fear in her voice. I quickly assessed the situation. The dogs were no joke. They could easily pick up our trail. We had to think of something. "The creek," I said, remembering the map. "There should be a mountain stream about half a mile from here. If we reach it and follow the water, the dogs will lose the trail." "Are you sure you can find it in the dark?" Hart asked doubtfully. "We'll have to take our chances," I said, picking Price up again. "There's no other way out." We quickened our pace as much as we could in the dark and uneven terrain. The dogs' barking grew louder. They were getting closer. I could feel the sweat pouring into my eyes and my legs shaking with exertion. Price seemed to grow heavier with each step, but I couldn't let myself give up. Not now. Suddenly I heard the sound of water. The creek! I exhaled. We're almost there. A few more minutes and we came to a small mountain stream, gurgling merrily between the rocks. In another situation I would have appreciated the beauty of this place, but now we were not interested in scenery. Let's get into the water, I commanded. We walked upstream for about 200 yards, then came to the opposite bank. The water was icy, burning my tired legs. Tanner shrieked quietly as she entered the creek, but quickly pulled herself together. Hart helped me carry Price. We moved slowly against the current, trying not to slip on the wet rocks. The dog's barking was getting louder, but it was coming from different directions. It sounded like they'd lost track of him by the water and were scrambling to find him. "It's working," Hart whispered. "They're off the trail." "So far," I answered. "But they'll search along the creek in both directions. We need to get as far away as we can." We continued wading through the water for a few more minutes. Then I signaled for us to go ashore. When we got out of the creek, we found ourselves in a small clearing surrounded by a dense forest. "That way," I pointed to the thicket. "If we get to the ridge, we can go down to the road on the other side of the mountain. There's less chance of ambush." Price suddenly groaned and opened his eyes. "Where are we?" he wheezed. "Safe," I answered. "We're getting away from the chase. Hang on, help will be here soon." He tried to nod but lost consciousness again. His face was pale and sweaty. "He's getting worse," Tanner said quietly. "We have to hurry." I nodded and lifted Price up again. My arms and back screamed in pain, but I gritted my teeth and moved forward. Now was no time for weakness. Hart walked ahead, pushing branches apart and showing the way. Tanner stayed close to me, ready to support me if I started to fall. We were a team, bound by a common danger and the goal of surviving and getting out of this forest. The barking of the dogs gradually subsided behind us. Our trick with the creek had worked, at least temporarily. But I knew the kidnappers wouldn't give up so easily, not with $1.5 billion at stake. We kept moving forward, step by step, approaching the ridge of the mountain. There was a long descent ahead of us, and then the unknown. But as long as we were alive and free, there was a chance to get out of this mess, and I intended to take that chance to the end. Dawn found us on the eastern slope of the mountain. The sky was colored in soft pink tones, but I was not interested in the beauty of nature. My shoulders were burning from the weight of Price, who was now regaining consciousness and then falling back into oblivion. His breathing became hoarse and intermittent. "We should take a break," Tanner said, noticing my stagger. "You've been on your feet for over 10 hours. "Not now," I shook my head. "There should be a ranger's cabin over that ridge. It's safer there." Hart walked ahead, scrutinizing the trail. He kept his automatic at the ready, though his ammunition was running low, only 5 rounds left in the magazine. My gun was a little better, 3 rounds. "How much farther?" Hart asked, stopping at a fallen tree and helping me over it with Price on my shoulders. "About half a mile," I answered, checking my internal compass. "There should be a radio transmitter to communicate with the rangers. If it works, we can call for help." We continued on our way. I tried to follow the animal trails. The ground was harder here, and the tracks were less visible. Despite my fatigue, my army training hadn't failed me. I could still navigate by the sun and the terrain. "Look," Hart pointed ahead. A small log building appeared among the trees. "Is that it?" "Yes," I nodded. "It's the woodsman's cabin. You stay here, and I'll see if anyone's there." I gently lowered Price to the ground, and Tanner immediately crouched beside him, supporting his head. "Here," I handed Hart the gun. "If anything goes wrong, go east. There's a highway about 3 miles that way." Hart nodded and accepted the gun. I ducked down and sprinted quickly toward the cabin. Outwardly, it looked quiet, no sign of people. The windows were intact, the door locked. I walked around the perimeter of the shack, scrutinizing the ground for fresh footprints. Nothing suspicious. Returning to the door, I peered through the window, an ordinary woodsman's hut with a minimum of furniture, a table, a couple of chairs, a narrow bed against the wall, and a stove. The lock on the door was simple, and I opened it easily with a folding knife. Carefully stepping inside, I took another look around. There was an old radio transmitter on the table, just what we needed. After making sure the cabin was secure, I returned to the others. "All clear," I reported. "There's a radio inside." Hart helped me lift Price, and together we carried him into the cabin. Tanner closed the door and pulled the faded curtains on the windows. "Check the radio," she said, laying Price on the bed. "He needs immediate medical attention." I walked over to the desk and turned on the transmitter. To my surprise, it beeped quietly. The shack had electricity, apparently from the solar panels on the roof. All units, I began the transmission. "This is the Forest Ranger's hut in Sector 8. We have a medical emergency and need immediate medical evacuation. Over." At first there was only hissing in response, but then a man's voice broke through the interference. "Cabin in Sector 8. This is the Forest Guard Dispatch Service. State the nature of the emergency." "We have a seriously injured man who has lost a lot of blood," I replied. "We need urgent medical evacuation. We are also being pursued by armed men." "Roger that," the dispatcher replied after a short pause. "I'm transferring the information to the police and emergency services. Stay in touch." I put the microphone away and turned to Hart and Tanner. "They're calling for help. Now we need to hold out until they arrive." Tanner nodded and went back to Price, applying a water-soaked handkerchief to his forehead. Hart took up a position by the window, scrutinizing the woods. "Do you think they'll be able to track us?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the trees. "Maybe," I answered. "We've left tracks, despite all the precautions we've taken. And if they have thermal imagers—" The radio came back on. "Sector 8 cabin, this is the Pine Ridge Police Department. This is Detective Donovan. Who are you and what happened?" I grabbed the microphone. "Detective Donovan, this is Mark Brennan. I found the missing financiers, Price, Tanner, and Hart. They were kidnapped and held at a hunting lodge. We managed to escape, but were being chased. Price is critically injured and needs immediate medical attention." "Brennan?" Donovan sounded surprised. "I told you not to leave town. How did you even get there?" "It's a long story, Detective. I'll tell it when I see you. What's more important now is that we found the kidnapped and the documents worth $1.5 billion that the kidnappers were trying to get their hands on." "Copy that?" Donovan's voice became focused and clear. "The helicopter leaves in 10 minutes. The closest patrols are headed your way. Can you describe your exact location?" I gave her the coordinates of the cabin and described the terrain around it, a small clearing in front of the house, a stream 100 yards to the west, a distinctive rock outcropping on the southern slope of the mountain. "Roger that," Donovan replied. "Stay in the cabin and stay away from the windows. Help will be here in 20 to 30 minutes. "Roger that, over and out." I put the microphone away and turned to the others. "Help is on the way. We need to hold out for half an hour." Tanner nodded, keeping her eyes on Price. His condition was deteriorating. His breathing was shallow and his skin had taken on a grayish tint. "He won't last an hour without medical attention," she said quietly. "Internal bleeding." I went to the closet in the corner of the hut and searched for a first aid kit. Luckily, I found one, the standard first aid kit, plus a few packs of painkillers. "Here." I handed Tanner the pills and a bottle of water. "It'll help with the pain." She nodded gratefully and tried to give the medicine to Price, but he had trouble swallowing. Suddenly, Hart tensed. "Movement to the west," he whispered. "Someone's coming this way." I went quickly to the window and peered out from behind the curtain. A figure in camouflage flashed through the trees. One man, moving cautiously, with his gun at the ready. "One of the pursuers," I said. "It looked like they'd split up to comb the woods." "What do we do?" Hart asked, raising his automatic. "Wait," I said. "We're low on ammo and we don't know how many there are. If he passes by without noticing us, great. If he tries to come in, then we'll act." We lay low, watching the man approach. He moved professionally, checking every potential hiding place. When he came into the clearing in front of the cabin, I could see his face. "Shit," I breathed. "It's Decker." The main one who was in the cabin. Decker stopped, scrutinizing the cabin. He'd obviously noticed the footprints on the ground, the mussed grass, the broken branches. Slowly, holding his rifle at the ready, he headed for the door. "Get ready," I whispered to Hart. "If he comes in, shoot without warning." Decker stepped up onto the porch. His footsteps were almost inaudible, a true professional. He tentatively tried the doorknob. I held my breath, ready to rush forward at the first sign of intrusion. But that's when I heard the sound of a helicopter in the distance. Decker froze, listening. Then he quickly jumped off the porch and retreated toward the trees. But instead of hiding in the woods, he took up a position behind a large boulder 30 yards from the cabin. From there, he could control both the door and the clearing in front of the house, a place where the helicopter could land. "Smart," Hart muttered. "He wants to wait for the rescue team and shoot us when we get out." "Or take new hostages," I added. "Either way, we need to neutralize him before help arrives." I quickly looked around the cabin for a back door. Nothing but a small window in the back wall, too narrow for a grown man to fit through. "We have a problem," I said. "We're trapped, and help is coming right up to the ambush. We need to warn them." Tanner pointed to the radio. I nodded and grabbed the microphone. "Anyone approaching the cabin in Sector 8, this is Brennan. We have an ambush, I repeat. We have an ambush. Armed man 30 yards west of the shack behind a large boulder. Do not approach openly." "Roger that, Brennan," came the voice of the helicopter pilot. "Changing the landing plan. Hold on." The noise of the helicopter was getting louder and louder. I looked out the window and saw Decker adjusting the scope on his rifle, getting ready for the helicopter. "We need to distract him," I said to Hart. "Otherwise he'll shoot the pilot or the medics." Hart nodded and took up position at the other window. "I'll distract him with fire, and you try to come in from the side." "No," I shook my head. "You've only got 5 rounds. You need another plan." While Hart radioed the pilot, I took my gun and slipped out the door, ducking and running along the wall of the cabin. Decker, as I suspected, wasn't expecting an attack. I took advantage of his confusion and pointed the gun at his chest. "Drop the gun!" I shouted. "Now!" Decker froze, assessing the situation. His eyes narrowed as he recognized me. "Brennan," he hissed, "you were supposed to walk away and forget the whole thing." "Drop the gun," I repeated. "The helicopter's here and the police will be here soon. You can't get away." Decker slowly lowered the rifle to the ground, but when I stepped forward to retrieve it, he drew his pistol from his belt holster. I fired first. The bullet hit him in the shoulder and he recoiled, dropping the gun. But he didn't fall. Clenching his teeth in pain, he lunged at me, knocking my weapon from my hands. We rolled on the ground, exchanging blows. Decker was strong and well-trained, but I wasn't new to hand-to-hand combat either. Army training and years of security work hadn't gone to waste. I managed to flip him onto his back and landed a hard punch to his jaw. He went limp for a second, and I took advantage of that to elbow him in the throat. "Who ordered the kidnapping?" I growled. "Tell me." Decker wheezed, trying to throw me off, but I increased the pressure. "Tell me, who's behind all this?" "Cortez," he finally said. "Wayne Cortez from Apex. He organized the whole thing, along with Trevor." "Why?" I released the pressure a little so he could talk. "Money," Decker wheezed. $1.5 billion. Price and his company were moving it out of the country, illegally. Cortez found out and decided to intercept. At that moment, a helicopter appeared over the clearing. The noise of its blades drowned out Decker's voice, but I could make out a few more words. He used you, set you up, to create a diversion. The helicopter was descending on the east side of the clearing. I saw Hart and Tanner run out of the cabin, carrying Price on a makeshift blanket stretcher. Taking advantage of my momentary inattention, Decker jerked sharply and threw me off him. He tried to reach for his gun, which was lying nearby, but I managed to intercept his arm. We struggled again. Suddenly, a shot rang out. Decker jerked and collapsed. I turned around and saw Donovan standing 10 feet away with a gun in her hand. "Are you okay, Brennan?" she asked, coming closer. "Yeah," I nodded, getting to my feet. "Thank you for your timely intervention." "Don't thank me." She holstered her gun. "You disobeyed my orders and left town. I must arrest you." "He saved us," came Tanner's voice. She was standing next to the stretcher where the paramedics were already treating Price. "Without him, we'd all be dead." Donovan shifted her gaze from Tanner to me. "Is that true?" "I'll tell you everything, Detective," I replied. "But first we have to get them to the hospital. And another thing." I told her about what Decker had said about Cortez and his connection to the kidnapping. Donovan frowned. "If that's true, we have top-level security corruption," she said. "I want all the details. And these," she nodded at Tanner and Hart, "should testify as well." "Of course," I agreed. "But first, the hospital." The paramedics had already loaded Price and the bound Decker into the helicopter. Tanner and Hart climbed up after him. Donovan gestured for me to join them. "You go with them," she said. "I'll come to the hospital later and we'll figure it out." I nodded and climbed into the helicopter. As we rose into the air, I saw police cars pulling into the clearing. The forest silence was broken by sirens and voices. The hunt was over. A week later, I was sitting in Lawrence Price's office in the Meridian Capital skyscraper in downtown New York City. The view from the window was spectacular, all of Manhattan in the palm of my hand. Price looked much better than the last time we met. The pallor was gone, the bruises were gone, only the scar on his temple was a reminder of the nightmare. "So, Mr. Brennan," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I've invited you here to thank you personally for the rescue. You risked your life for people who, let's face it, didn't treat you very well." I shrugged. "I was just doing what I thought was right." "And that's respectable," Price nodded, "especially considering your former boss was behind the kidnapping. Cortez is in custody." "Yes," I confirmed. "They picked him up 2 days ago. Donovan says they have enough evidence to charge him with kidnapping, attempted murder, and a dozen other crimes." "Okay." Price tapped his fingers on the table. "I'd like to offer you a job, Mr. Brennan." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "A job?" "Yes. Meridian Capital needs a person responsible for transportation security and VIP escort. Someone I can trust. Someone with your skills and, more importantly, your morals." He slid a folder over to me. "There's a contract. 3 times the salary you had at Apex. Full medical coverage, including treatment for your mother. A corporate apartment in Manhattan. And," he smiled, "no sudden layoffs in the middle of the trip." I opened the folder and looked over the contract. The figure in the salary column made me blink. "That's a very generous offer, Mr. Price." "It's the least I can do," he replied. "Not only did you save our lives, but you helped recover $1.5 billion worth of company assets. Consider it an investment in our future security." I closed the folder and looked at Price. "I accept the offer." "Good." He stood up and extended his hand. "Welcome to Meridian Capital, Mr. Brennan." As I shook his hand, I remembered that moment in the parking lot of the hotel in Phoenix when I received my termination letter. "You are no longer needed." At the time, it felt like my life was falling apart. Who would have thought it would be the beginning of something new? Sometimes losing a job isn't the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of a path that leads to where you're really needed. Leaving Price's office, I felt calm for the first time in a long time. My mom would get treatment, the bills would be paid, and my new job, well, it was going to be interesting. And this time I'll be working with people who value not only professionalism, but also loyalty and honesty. Stepping out of the skyscraper onto the bustling streets of Manhattan, I thought about how bizarre life can be sometimes. Who knows what other surprises it has in store? But now I was ready for them. I was no longer afraid of sudden change.